Who wants to share the power when you had the power by yourself for all those years? Women, when they ask for their rights, it's not because they are hysterical, it's not because they want to crush men in what they do. It's just asking to share the power, but sharing the power is very difficult. Feminism means equality between men and women. It's as simple as that. How you get to that is a different issue. So when I hear younger women saying, oh, I'm not a feminist, it's because the word has been charged with very negative connotations. It just means that we want to be considered as equal and that we want to have a say in everything that's going on. And there's no reason not to, actually.
When you say liberal, Jewish, and feminist, these are three adjectives which today, very unfortunately, seem in some contradiction to each other, which I don't think they are at all. Maybe pick two, but not three.
Today, I think that in the progressive sphere, where they think they are progressive, they're sometimes more conservative than me. And they do not represent all the voices within discriminated women or discriminated categories. I don't think today they play their role.
Is it because of electoral politics? Is it about who their voters are? They've abandoned part of their principles, or is there more to it?
You want to win the next elections. Your public is not going for democratic liberal values. You're abandoning the core values of democracy. I really believe that the progressive voices are not progressive anymore. Some of them have conflicts in Sudan, people being slaughtered, and there is nothing being said about it, nowhere, because unless it's going on in Gaza, it's not even mentioned in the press, it's not even mentioned on a humanitarian level. Guterres, Secretary General of the UN, would say Sudan is the biggest humanitarian crisis of this century. Nobody would even pick it up. Something is wrong here. There was, I think, a quest for change. And that's what I think my party represented. So we're in the government. And as you can see, the result of the elections are because the population wanted change. What I'm trying to do is make people understand that they should not accept that, But it's difficult.
Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Beyond the Bubble. And as always, we'd be very grateful if you like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done yet already, and tell your friends about it, and send us questions, feedback, comments, and information that you find useful and would like us to address. And with that, it's such a pleasure to have here someone who is a very visible, well-known, famous politician, author, public figure in Belgium and beyond, Viviane Teitelbaum, who is a feminist, an author, a senator, and someone with decades of experience and views on the state of affairs and the world. So we will try our best to cover a lot of ground, and there is so much to talk about, the past, the present, and the future. So welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Was it an accurate account of your profile? What have I missed?
No, it's accurate. I'm a committed feminist. I have been combating to defend democratic values since I was a student, fighting antisemitism, fighting for equality. And I've been a journalist for many years, and then I became elected politician, and first in the Brussels Parliament for 20 years and now in the Senate. So, yeah, it covers it.
That covers it all. And perhaps we start with, so you mentioned feminism, and you're also very active internationally in women leaders organizations. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So, yes, I'm today, through the Senate, I'm ambassador at Women Political Leaders, and I'm also the president of the network of women parliamentarians in the Francophonie, in the countries, French-speaking countries. And I work a lot on feminist issues there. And also I'm the European president of the International Council of Women. So I work both at the political level, but also grassroots organizations. I've always done both because I think it's important to get the voices from from where they come from the communities, from the organizations, and then carry those voices into politics and try to make laws and resolutions that can answer the challenges of the women in their own communities and in their countries.
And what does feminism mean today? I know it's a big question and a broad question, but I'm sure it's evolved and changed over time. And is it focusing mostly on having more female leaders, politicians, representatives, or it's more the substantive issues that you are focusing on?
So it's not a difficult question, actually. Feminism means equality between men and women. It's as simple as that. That's the basis. Then how you get to that is a different issue. But feminism as such, it just means that the majority of the population doesn't remain, for instance, a political minority or underrepresented within the economic world, within the financial world, within society at large. It means that women have the same rights as men, same obligations as men, but to consider them on the same level. That's feminism. It's just that. It means equality. So when I hear younger women saying, oh, yes, but I'm not a feminist, it's because the word has been charged with very negative connotations during the years, over the years. But in fact, it's not negative. It's not something that's trying to impose views, or it just means that we want to be considered as equal and that we want to have a say in everything that's going on. And there's no reason not to, actually. There's no reason. In some countries, it's a little, we're over half of the population, or at least half of the population. So there's no reason why women should not have the same voice discussing issues, making decisions. Parity, 50-50, it's not, for me, an aim. It's not a goal. It's a starting point. And it's a norm, a universal norm. That's feminism. Mm-hmm. After that, you can discuss how you implement it, and that's accordingly to, the issues. You can say, when you talk about violence against women, or when you talk about decision-making, or when you talk about how to combine work-life balance, all these issues, then you have ways to get to equality. But feminism is just that, actually. It's very simple.
And why do you think the narrative around it, or the term itself, has been under pressure, or has it been kind of redefined by political forces on purpose?
Yes, of course. But it's all about domination. It's all about sharing the power, actually. And who wants to share the power when you had the power by yourself for all those years? So some men do not want to share the power. And so, of course, it's been presented as, you had those, it started at the beginning of the 20th century with the suffragette, with women's lib, with all that. And at the time, already, it's, people said, oh, but they're hysterical, oh, but they want to look at them, they're not capable of, and they don't want to this or that. And it took time, it took waves of, taking the space, occupying the space, and convincing that women, when they ask for their rights, it's not because they are hysterical, it's not because they want to crush men in what they do. It's just asking to share the power, but sharing the power is very difficult. So yes, I think it's because male domination over the centuries actually did not deal well with women coming out and saying, hey guys, we also want, piece of the pie. And from now on, you'll have to listen to us. And from now on, we also want to be there. And we also want to have a voice here. So yes, it's difficult for some men to understand. So I think that's why it was loaded with negative feelings.
And where do you see maybe the state of feminism or the situation of feminism, or at least not even feminism, but just to say the political aims you are fighting for? What's your perception about it in Belgium? So where are we now?
So Belgium is not ranking so badly on feminist issues. We have good representation in some areas. We do not have 50-50 parity anywhere, unfortunately. And that's why I always say we need quotas. So many women say, I don't want quotas because it would undermine my reaching the position. And many men say, we don't want quotas because then you will have women that are not capable taking the place of men who are capable. So I think there are as many capable women as there are capable men, and if all men were capable, we would have known about it by now. So I think it's in Belgium, we would need quotas. In my party and some other parties today, they're struggling with that, but that's my view, my personal view. I think if you have laws, and quotas are a temporary measure to correct inequalities. It's not something that needs to stay there. It's to just give, to implement things faster and not wait for another half century to get equal representation. So in Belgium, on that, we are not there yet, honestly. Even though it's better, for instance, all the laws regarding elections, where you now need to have one man, one woman on the list, and you need to have 50-50, it helps. And when you need to have one woman, one man in the two first positions, it helps because then parties need to give visibility to some women, and that helps to be elected. So we're getting there, but it's a little slow. Also, within public administration, we're not there yet either because you have not enough women in leadership positions in Belgium. On equal pay, we're not doing so bad. On equal pay, we have a very small delta compared to other European countries, so that's good. But I will say that it's based on the salary itself, on the salary grid itself. Now, you know that when you hire someone, if you need to respect the salary grid, you will do it, but then you can give advantages to men in terms of car, insurances, or other benefits. And women will sometimes ask for Wednesday afternoons instead of a car. They will ask for different issues. So it's good on the delta, but it doesn't take into consideration other advantages that women don't get and that men get.
That is, of course, the difficulty sometimes of, do you compare apples with apples? Is it truly the same job content? How do those benefits compare if somebody gets a car versus half a day off and those sort of things? So how are those being
So that's still difficult because it's not taken into consideration when you make the calculation on equal salary, equal pay. But on a whole, I think in Belgium, we understood that for the same job in the same position, you need to pay the same to women and men. The other difficulty is that you have you have much more women in underpaid jobs, in part-time jobs. When you have many women in a job, the salary often goes down. For instance, teachers, you have many teachers that most teachers are women, so the salaries are not as they should be, I would say. Same for nurses, same for daycare personnel, same for cashiers and others. So women are really usually overrepresented in low salary, precarious jobs, whereas men are more into higher positions. So for the same job, they would be paid the same, but you have overrepresentation of women in underpaid jobs.
And the critics would say, or those who are, let's say, more skeptical about the topic would say, well, it's partly about, also incentives, but also maybe lifestyle choices, or they might say, well, women might be more, not necessarily women, but the different types of persons would be attracted to different kind of careers and jobs. So how does that come into play for a conversation of this kind, to say, well, women may be more inclined to become teachers, whereas men may favor other kind of jobs?
Well, it may be so, but if women are more inclined to become teachers, it's not a reason to have that job being underpaid. Same for nurses. If you have more nurses that are women than men, today, taking into consideration the load of work of those tasks should be also on the agenda. And it's not because it's women. And we saw during COVID that, in fact, women are those who work mostly on jobs that take care of people. It's all what we call the care. It's not only children, it's also parents. It's jobs where you, in education, health, large distribution, all those jobs are not considered, actually, with the same value as other jobs where men would be more represented. And so the salary grid doesn't follow because it's not considered the same way. So even though it's a choice, it would be, I would say it's a choice that needs to be supported in the same way that we would support other jobs where you have more men, in construction, for instance, or in other jobs. So why would it be, It's
such a horizontal question. It really affects every part of society. And you're a liberal, and you're a representative in MR, which is, how would it define itself? As a center-right, centrist, or center-right
yes.
liberal party? And
yes.
and I'm curious, and again, a little bit moving away from the topic of feminism, but more the term liberal, because today it's also under
pressure.
A lot of pressure, and has gone through different interpretations, and sometimes in other contexts it's used as a slur, and in other contexts it's a pure description of a political belief. So how do you see that part of the political spectrum?
I think that in Belgium today, being a liberal is under pressure because when you have men and politicians, men and women, coming out on some issues that are controversial. And today, the liberals are probably the only ones coming out on some issues with a certain perspective. Then we are immediately considered as extreme right. And so it's not possible to recognize some of the political voices today within the political arena. And my president of party, Georges-Louis Boucher, for instance, whenever he comes out on some issues, it can be on tackling issues to
work-life balance or immigration or anything.
Yeah, for instance, immigration, for instance, other issues, then he's immediately considered as extreme right because he doesn't go mainstream with the left. And today, I think the left showed some limits to their politics when we see this, and we can discuss about that as well, when we see how Brussels has been abandoned to communitarism, to really in Brussels today you feel the tensions between different parts of the population. You feel many people not feeling comfortable in Brussels anymore, and it has been a left socialist and green leadership for 20 years. Then when you challenge their positions on those issues, on other issues, then immediately you're considered extreme right. Immediately. Even if you go out on, for instance, secularism or I think anything that pertains to society issues, to how you want to live your life, immediately you're considered extreme right. There is no more space for debate, actually. And I find it's saddening, because when I go abroad and I say I'm a liberal, there is consideration. You can agree with me or disagree with me. You can agree to disagree, but at least you can discuss, you can dialogue, you can exchange, you can, feed the debate and have people think about those issues, and it can enrich you. Sometimes you think you're right, but then you discuss with someone and you say, maybe I should, maybe that's interesting, maybe I should add that to my reflections. But if anything you say is being considered fascist and you label people like that, then there's no more place for debate. And I feel that's what's happening, especially in Brussels, but at large in Belgium too.
Yeah, or even beyond, way beyond, because, and that's the phenomenon where it's not like you as an individual or representative or intellectual and me as your conversational partner. This is where the debate happens about ideas, and we remain who we are, but we can relatively easily disagree about ideas. These two have become, for so many people, one and the same. So if I challenge your ideas or I disagree with the way you see politics or the world, I immediately pose a threat to you as a person. And that's a very unhealthy way of looking at the world, because how can then we exchange those views and come for some sort of agreement, or agree to disagree, but still at least I learned something. So at least the desire to change my views or update the way I see the world based on that. Because if everything you say, I feel it's a personal attack, then immediately I'm going to label you enemy, public enemy, and therefore use terms like extreme whatever or very, very radical political descriptors.
Exactly. And that's what's happening on issues like immigration, on issues of feminism. If you're not having this intersectional approach, or what some call woke, it happens on issues like international issues like the Middle East. That's, starting a fire immediately. It's like you cannot even have a point of view that's different with the mainstream point of view. And sometimes I feel like I'm back in the Middle Ages, because, when people said that Jews were poisoning the wells, or when even before people were saying that Jews murdered Christ, then everybody agreed with it, and you could not disagree with it. It was like, that's a statement. Jews poisoned the wells. And
like an axiom.
Absolutely. And then if you would come with some nuanced discourse approach, then you would be an outcast. And that's what's happening today. Exactly. So
the Middle East, there's a lot to say, and perhaps we'll go there as well. But even on topics like feminism, which you would say hardly any topic would be more pertaining to the political left traditionally than women's rights and feminism, and even minority rights and anti-Semitism and human rights at large. But when you say that, even if you're not endorsing what you call intersectional view or very, well, even intellectually complicated way of looking at of hierarchies and which minority is actually on top of the victimhood or oppression hierarchy versus others. I mean, this is the whole point of it, is the equality part of it. So the minute you start doing that, many people don't realize that they are actually introducing a perspective exactly like the one they are trying to fight against.
Oh yeah, and it's like a competition of victims. Now you're the good victim and there is the bad victim. There's the victim you need to take care of, and there's the victim that doesn't have access to openly express their voice and the way they feel about things, the way they are being discriminated about. So it's like today, for instance, if you're being raped, if you're a white woman being raped by a black man, then you should not expose what happened, because then you would contribute to racism. That's the intersectional approach. That's making a hierarchy between victims, and that's not acceptable. And so, but very regularly, I'm being called a feminist that only cares about white feminists. Why? I work with many women in many areas. I work with African women. I work with Muslim women. I work with Jewish women. I work with secular women that don't feel belonging to any of those. But because they put me in a box, then I do not today correspond to what, according to their view, a feminist should be. And therefore, I'm not a good feminist, and I defend the wrong victims. And so, you know, what can you do about that? I can only reaffirm my commitment, which I do regularly. But then, you know, it's very complicated today to be this liberal, feminist, Jewish voice. I have to say that, because it's they really put me in a box, but outside of the agora in some ways. They put me as someone that should not be allowed to defend some of the voices that, for some of them, I'm really out of the circle. Maybe not outcast, because that's very strong, but maybe for some people I am.
I think that the sentiment there is kind of disloyalty, like you've betrayed certain causes by those things. And when you say liberal, Jewish, and feminist, these are three adjectives which today, very unfortunately, seem in some contradiction to each other, which I don't think they are at all. They shouldn't be, but given the context around it, have been redefined in some sense, that you maybe pick two, but not three.
Yeah, but at the same time, today, I think that in the progressive sphere, where they think they are progressive, they're sometimes more conservative than me. And they do not represent all the voices within the discriminated women or discriminated categories. I don't think today they play their role. I think probably, and because they are sometimes more conservative at the left than the liberals, they probably feel or guilty or not at ease, and then they attack those who are sometimes more progressive than them, and putting them in this box saying, oh, but you're extremist, you're a fascist, we don't want to listen to you. Well, maybe you should, because what you're doing and the way you defend people, it doesn't work today. Because you're complacent with, when you're, so I'll be blunt but and
Go ahead.
open, but when you're at the left and you say you're progressive and you support Islamist voices and you support oppression of women through hijab or through what's happening in Iran or through what's happening in Afghanistan, then for me, you're not progressive. You're part of the conservative voices. And I would challenge and expose what's happening in Iran. But when I do, I have to look out for any progressive voices that will join me in that. They don't. They don't. So maybe today being at the left is more conservative and should not go with fight against discrimination and fight against extremism, because they don't anymore. They abandoned part of their fight, which should be part of their definition. If you're at the left and you're progressive, you should be fighting anti-Semitism. You should be fighting discrimination, all forms of discrimination. And you should be fighting those, and you should be supporting those women who are fighting to live freely. And they don't anymore.
You mentioned Iran. So, for instance, those who, and of course, you can debate the geopolitical complexity of recent events. But when someone is not truly about empowering women who have been beaten, who've been raped, who've been imprisoned simply for not wearing their veil properly in Iran, how can you not support that, right?
Exactly.
Like you do ask that question, and especially that the Iranian diaspora around the world, which there are millions of Iranians outside the country, are very much against that kind of oppressive regime. But then those who at least in their job titles or their political flags say, well, we are feminists, we are supporting, and then they don't. So it's this very strange, you could say hypocritical, sometimes schizophrenic, and sometimes just very opportunistic phenomenon, it seems. So I'm wondering, is it because of electoral politics? Is it about who their voters are? They've abandoned part of their principles, or is there more to it?
No, I think the first reason would be that it's for political reasons. You want to win the next elections. Your public is not going for democratic liberal values. Liberal in the noble sense. I mean,
the classic sense.
In the classic sense, and you're abandoning the core values of democracy. You're abandoning the core values of feminism, only because you want to seduce an electorate that will not follow you if you take a strong stand, for instance, for Iranian women and Afghan women for I mean, really. So yeah, I think that's and they're the same, because it's all, in French you say tout est dans tout. Everything is in everything. It's the same who abandon some women and their freedom, that abandon Jews facing anti-Semitism, that abandon homosexual in some countries that are being chased and murdered. And I really believe that they're not today, that the progressive voices are not progressive anymore. Some of them. I'm not saying everyone. I mean, I don't think you should ever say all or everyone, but within the progressive parties and circles, some of them abandoned the progressive aspect of it. And they're more conservative than the conservatives. And so I find it difficult today, because when you expose that, even when you say that, here it's comfortable, I'm sitting with you, I'm saying that, I feel, protected to say that. But when you're out there during debates and you say that, you get a very strong opposition, you get yelled at, you get harassed. It's not easy. It really is not easy.
And both in the parliament, I guess, and beyond, in media or elsewhere?
In the media, yeah. So in Belgium, you have media that's one-sided. You don't have this pluralistic representation within the media. In Great Britain, in France, in Italy, in Germany, you have papers that are openly more left and openly more right. You have Libération and you have Le Figaro. You have in Great Britain the same. And so you have a diversity of opinions. In Belgium, you don't have that. It's one-sided only. Some a little more, some a little less. But it's very difficult, even in some newspapers that are more objective, I would say, to come across with some ideas. It's today, freedom of speech is at risk in Belgium. I'm really, unfortunately, making that assessment because there are some things in Belgium that you cannot say anymore. And contrary also to other countries like France or, for instance, France, where you have philosophers that come out, writers that express different points of view, and you have debates, very sound debates. It's healthy to have those debates. We said it before. In Belgium, you feel that you don't have that anymore because it's like everybody's on the same side, you know? And so when you have a different voice, it's very difficult to come across, very difficult.
Let me, well, a little bit push back again as a recently minted Belgian voter for some times. But to say, if you look at the most recent elections, I mean, your very party has gained a lot of seats and a lot of more power. So that may, and again, we're not talking media. We're talking the political forces. So there seems to be support for that across the board, including in the southern part of the country in Wallonia, which was quite a surprise.
Yes, and probably the win there was even more spectacular than in Brussels. And in Flanders also, of course. But there, in Flanders, the left has been
decreasing,
for over the years. But yes, I think there is within the population, because of what we said, this aspiration to a different voice that can come through. And there was, I think, a really a quest for change. And that's what I think my party represented. So we're in the government. And as you can see, the elections are the results. The result of the elections are because the population wanted change. And then you have systematically and all the time attacks from the unions, from the media, from that are really consistently attacking and systematically attacking the parties that are now in charge. And it's like what the people wanted and the result of what the people wanted is only that important because what the unions want and what the media put forward and what other parties want is put on the same level. And it's not like, well, we did win and it's important and now we can make the changes like it would be in other countries. Okay, you won, you want to make the changes, but we refuse those changes and we're going to fight them. And we make protests and we have strikes all the time and repeatedly because we want to overturn actually what the elections, the result of the elections. So that's also very Belgian. Now they're starting to taste that in France because it's complicated there on the political level as well. But yeah, it's you cannot decide to overturn results of the elections because you don't like the results of the elections. You have to give a chance to a new politics. And if you don't like what's implemented and how it's implemented, the next time you vote otherwise. That's a democratic way to go about it. And not immediately, even before something is implemented, say, oh, we don't like it, so we're going to block it.
Yeah, that's ultimately what you're describing as an ideal situation is the ultimate classic liberal view, where you constructed a system with rules and frameworks and institutions, and what you fill it with is through the process. But just because you don't like the content because the wrong political group or idea has won, then you start attacking the system. Eventually, it's also going to bring you down, because if you don't have a system anymore through which you can gain power, then ultimately it's either anarchy, either some dictatorship, or some extreme end of the spectrum, instead of keeping those building elements in place.
And that's what's happening in Brussels, by the way, because we are now at the limits of a system that's not working anymore, because the Liberal Party won the elections in Brussels, so they should have the hand. They should be able to form a new government. Second party on the French-speaking side is the Socialist Party, and then you have a majority that has to be formed in the Flemish side of the spectrum, of the political spectrum. But today, what's happening is that you have parties that say, okay, you won, but I don't want to work with you if this or if that, or if you take those as a partner, or if you do that, or if your program is this. So when you don't play the game of democracy and you push the system to the edge, then, as we have now, no government for over a year, it's becoming a disaster for the citizens of this region. You have security issues that are dramatic. People die on the street, get murdered on the streets. You have streets that are filthy. You have no more respect for living together. I mean, people are fighting all the time, everywhere, on everything. It's like you cannot... And then you have the financial issue, because Brussels is going bankrupt. And you cannot take care of the region, because the actors don't want to sit on the table because they don't like who won the game. And that's not how a democracy can function. And whatever, initiative, proposal that you bring around the table to try to make it work is being rejected. And so we are still at, still...
It's complete paralysis.
Completely. Huh?
I want to switch a little bit from, I'm not saying happier topics, but just another extremely interesting story is perhaps it's a kind of word, not in because it's a fantasy story. These are real stories, and I want to go back a little bit to your early days, your childhood, because once I heard you speak at an event, and you already mentioned that you have been very active for many years on anti-Semitism and these kind of issues, and given your background, your family heritage, and I want to explore that a little bit more, because at that event I heard you tell the story of your mom, and I understand you even wrote a book about specifically that, or the Holocaust era and the post-Holocaust times. So I'd like to hear that, and I think it's just a fascinating, story, but a fascinating representation of what it means for someone to have come from that family background.
So yes, I'm the daughter. In fact, me and my sister, we are the daughters of a hidden child. My mother was hidden during World War II, and I think that's why it's in my DNA, not only to fight for democratic values, to fight anti-Semitism, but to fight extremism as such. I cannot imagine not fight against all the extremist representations, extreme left, extreme right, extreme Islamists, because I want to fight to make this society better for all our children and our grandchildren. And I think it's important to act. It's only when I wrote the book on hidden children, I was nearly 40, that I understood everything, about my mother's story within the big story. And I was meeting all those hidden children who basically were telling me, oh, I'll tell you my story, but really it's not so interesting. I survived, but you should go and talk to so-and-so. And they were all telling me this story, probably without realizing how important it was, and what they went through was traumatic, the same way it was for my mother, but she never said it in such words. And in the beginning, they didn't tell me that in such words either. So it was, very, very touching to hear those adults explaining their life as children, and explaining also that what they lived through and how they lived through it, but always also saying it was difficult, but I wasn't in camps. It was difficult.
Concentration camps.
Concentration camp, extermination camps. It was difficult for me, but my mother died. And so what I went through, really, compared to that, is, are you sure you want to hear the story? Because I'm not sure it's worth telling, Mm-hmm. And discovering all that was really, for me, the key to understanding where I came from, what my mother went through, and what all that generation went through. And
it was in Belgium?
It was in Belgium. My book was about hidden children in Belgium, and the work of the resistance, and all the people that saved the children, and also some that didn't save them, but that delivered them to the Nazis. But basically, my story was about the survivors, surviving children, and how they survived the Nazi period. So,
how did that book change you?
It really changed me. It changed me first because I understood the story of the hidden children, who at that point started talking. Also because probably they were at an age where they were now in the front, and it would have been normal, even if their parents would not have been killed, deported, to be able to express and describe their life, because they were now the eldest in the pyramid of their families. Also regarding looted assets, they could not talk about what was taken from them, because they had the impression they would betray their parents, because the legacy was so heavy on losing them that it didn't matter what they lost materially. So at that point in the early 90s, mid-90s actually, they really felt empowered and allowed to talk and testify about their experience, about what happened to them, about what was taken to them in lives and materially. So it was, something that really changed me totally, because I understood where I came from within that story. And I went back to my mother, and I started also interviewing for the Spielberg Foundation, oral history, and I had her testify also on record, because I thought it was important to be able to hear the whole story. And after that, she told me the whole story, and she was hidden with her parents, so it was a story, bad story, but some of the other stories were. But it's funny how those hidden children kept putting a hierarchy in the suffering. Those who suffered the most were those who were deported and died. Then there was those who were deported but came back, and then there were the hidden children who lost parents and family. And then there were the hidden children who didn't lose parents and family, and then there were the hidden children who were hidden with their parents. And the suffering for all of them was there. It's not like you can say, oh, you suffered more or you suffered less. No, everybody suffered in their own way, with their own experience. Some had brothers and sisters, some were treated very well, some were too small to understand, some were very big and were worrying about the parents and the siblings, some were not. So even if you were separated, you didn't experience hiding in the same way and with the same intensity. But everybody was always telling the story, trying to say, oh, okay, I'll tell you my story, but, and that was very, very touching. And that confirmed me also in the necessity of fighting for a democratic society, in the necessity for fighting against extreme rights, as I did for those many years, but also against rising extreme left and Islamism, all those forms of extremism. That only made me more determined to continue that fight. And at that time, I was a journalist, but then early 2000s, I became a member of parliament, and I really felt, the importance and the importance of the legacy to continue fight for those values, for those core values, and I thought of my grandparents, and I thought of those who were exterminated during the Shoah, of my family and all those families, and I said, I have this role to play. I need to be there and fight for those values.
No, it's an incredible story, again, not in and by itself, but in how it still lives on, and its legacy, and how it carried you forward, and how it carried others. And I just want to come back to one aspect of it when you mentioned it, even before I had the thought, but you already actually brought it up, is that the victims who are ultimately victims, I mean, it's not normal for anyone, a child especially, to need to have been a hidden child, need to have been secretly hidden, but also to constantly worry about being deported ultimately and killed. So it's everybody had some and very severe psychological impact on them. And I totally hear through your words to say, don't kind of self-discriminate. Don't tell yourself that my suffering is on level 5, whereas someone else is level 1. Therefore, who am I to feel anxiety? Who am I to feel the fear that I had felt as a 5-year-old, and now I'm a 50-year-old adult, and still I have those psychological impacts still, right? Like, and push it away from themselves to say, I don't have the right
exactly
to have those post-traumatic symptoms or post-traumatic effects of those times, and looking at everyone to say, hey, everyone has the right to be stress-free, or to be stress is not the right word, but to be fear-free and live in a society that protects you as a citizen, no matter what forces are trying to strike you down.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very important, and that's why when today people are trying to put competition between victims, I cannot accept that. It's not acceptable, because a woman, whatever her color, her convictions, her origin, her background, her commitments, a man, whatever his color, background, commitments, everyone has the right to live freely in dignity. And that's what I'm fighting for. And I cannot accept that people would say that because I have some commitments that they disagree with, I would not be able to defend all of them. It really goes against everything I believe in. It goes against who I am. It goes against where I come from. And I will continue. I don't give up. I won't give up. That's why I'm fighting, to recognize gender apartheid in Afghanistan as a crime against humanity. That's why I fight for freedom for homosexuals here. That's why I fight against anti-Semitism. And the way anti-Semitism is expressed today, I can only think back on all those testimonies that were that people confide in me, that I harvested at the time, And what I see today and the fear I see today in some of the people that are afraid and that cannot project themselves in a future in my country is for me really devastating. It's really devastating. And what I'm trying to do is make people understand that they should not accept that, you know? But it's difficult. It's difficult.
And you did mention it even personally difficult. Like you mentioned earlier what an intense reaction so you sometimes get, but it goes even beyond that, as I understand.
Yes, I get insults, I get death threats, I get calls to murder, I get physically harassed in some protest marches, I get intimidated during meetings, political meetings. It's very difficult, and I don't want to give up because it wouldn't be right to those who are not there anymore. It wouldn't be right to those who want to live freely. Yeah, I'm getting emotional, but...
I really admire that inner strength you have, and I understand that no strength is unlimited. So the pressure that is being put on you, and personally, and of course with your family and everyone else, it's not unlimited.
No, it's never. It's never unlimited.
But it's still, there are reserves there, I can see.
I think I'm lucky because I have colleagues in my party who understand, who have the strength to be in solidarity and fight those fights, which aren't their fights always, but they share it. And I think what we need to understand is that, for instance, fighting anti-Semitism cannot be the fight of the Jews. It has to be a fight of society. And in my party, I can feel that people understand that. The same, fighting for freedom of choice of life for homosexuals, it has to be done by society. Not choice of, but guarantee their freedom. That's necessary. And in my party, I feel that it's there, so it gives me strength. Also, within the community, we have people that are really fighters. For instance, we created, after October 7, we created l'Institut Jonatas Institute, and which fights anti-Semitism and anything that favors it. And so being able to work with colleagues, being able to work with friends who share your point of view and who are willing to fight with you, who support you when you are in danger and you support them when they're in danger, who support you in the importance of the fights, that drives me. You know, it helps. It gives you strength to continue, you know, when you're being attacked and you can call on some colleagues or friends and they say, you know, okay, we'll do that and we'll go about it this way. When you have a president of party which is there and is not afraid to go and fight for that and has, convictions, you say?
Yeah.
Then it really helps.
For sure, because my impression is that so many times these, save for the physical attacks, we're talking about the political or media or other attacks. There needs to be very strong, assertive, and again, not aggressive, but assertive declarations and interviews and perhaps marches and any form of showing that this is a red line, this is not acceptable, that this doesn't go, and this is the limit exactly for the preservation of a liberal society. And again, liberal, I don't mean that in the strictly political sense, but the way that we have here, the way we want to live together as a society, and the rule of law, and making sure there's no discrimination of any kind,
exactly.
and that everybody has those rights that they can practice through the courts and through law enforcement and through all the ways. that needs to be said regularly, time and time again, and say the forces that are pushing back against it cannot prevail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. That's the sense of my commitment into politics. It's what I did before, what I do as a member of parliament, senator today, and it's what I'll continue to do always, because it's important to have those voices, and we cannot give up. We cannot give up. Not today, not tomorrow. It's and it's important to acknowledge the past, to understand the past, to know about the past, to be able to today to build the future, you know? And I worked on that, knowing, digging into the past, understanding the past, the mechanisms that favor society, that leave the democratic space, and how they built their rationale, and how they seduce populations, and then you can put draft laws, resolutions, and try to fight it when you see it, you know, and being able to identify it and then fight it, and yeah.
And do you feel you had more, maybe influence is the word, or maybe more voice as an author, as a journalist, or as a senator?
It's a different voice, a different path, but they all come together in one place where what you want to do is contribute to society through testimonies, through giving voice to through the testimonies, through documenting what happened then and documenting what's happening now, and then try to have legislation go through. So I think they're all important and come together in one place. Yeah.
I appreciate you using the word contribute, because I think it's a great way to express what you do, and then again contrast it with the extremist forces who are not seeing themselves as contributing, but forcing, or trying to shape or change societies, and with increasingly authoritarian,
yes.
and increasingly
imposing
a certain way of living, or a way of being, or societal system or order. And it's not contributing, it's not shaping it, it's effectively forming or reforming it. And again, not reforming in a progressive or liberal sense, but forcibly remodeling it.
Remodeling through silencing some voices, through rejecting a system, a democratic system, and imposing views and a way to, yeah. I think it's a difficult period today in Belgium, in Europe, and maybe beyond. You see it with all the different conflicts in the world. You see it with women being silenced in many countries, being erased in other countries from life in society. You know, what's happening in Afghanistan. I'm coming back with Afghanistan, but Afghanistan is really a place where women are not allowed to be alive. I mean, they are buried alive under a burqa, but under laws that do not allow them to circulate, to work, to use their voice, to be heard, to be heard by other women, to heal themselves, to heal others, to access to education. They're not allowed to go into public spaces. They're not allowed to anything anymore today, and they're really being silenced, erased, and their voices are being totally silenced. I mean, it's like they're not allowed to live anymore. And Some of them are dying because of violence, of poverty, of little girls being sold to older men. And there is indifference, which I cannot accept as a feminist, but as a Democrat also.
And is that the indifference is even international? And that's the most shocking thing about these phenomena, where at the time of this recording, I don't know when this is going to be released, but unfortunately I don't have high hopes that the situation will be different at the time of release, is right now there are about 1 million Afghanis being expelled from Iran. You see zero, even media coverage, barely anything. But again, 1 million people are being expelled. And again, women obviously are the most exposed to this.
Yes.
And there's no outrage, there's no protest, there's no nothing.
No.
Well, if anything is beyond the pale, it's this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have conflicts in Sudan where you have violence against women, where you have people being slaughtered, where you have babies being raped, 1-year-old babies being raped. I cannot even imagine how that looks like. I mean, it just tears my heart apart, and there is nothing being said about it, nowhere. I mean, I hashtag no Jews, no news all the time, because unless it's going on in Gaza, it's not even mentioned in the press, it's not even mentioned in the political arena, it's not even mentioned on a humanitarian level. It's just going on. I mean, Guterres, Secretary General of the UN, would say Sudan is the biggest crisis, humanitarian crisis of this century. Nobody would even pick it up. It's not shared. There is no resolutions, no votes, no marches in the streets, nothing. I mean, something is wrong here. Something
is fundamental wrong with this selective outrage. And again, we could go to that direction in analyzing the reasons, and many other people have given many perspectives on that. But just in a nutshell, it's indeed something is disproportionate about this. And on the other side of that equation is these 10 times, 100 times larger conflicts with death tolls, with complexities, with human casualties and everything happening there, and it gets absolutely zero attention at all.
Yeah, I think one day historians will have to analyze that properly.
Yeah, it's more the media historians and another aspect of it, and perhaps we could talk about it. I'd be very interested in hearing your views. So you mentioned Islamism, and again, to make first a distinction between Muslim populations and Islamism is extremely important, because we want to be sure that there's no conflation of that. And the other one is what outside forces may be impacting these political trends, be that Belgium or elsewhere, because there have been recent reports on a lot of foreign influence and often fundamentalist countries / organizations putting a lot of money into financing sometimes seemingly cultural projects or seemingly benign political projects, but some of them have been called out. So I'd love to hear your take on that.
So, of course, the distinction has to be made, and it's made, it's like on some issues you always have to start by stating the obvious. So, yes, obviously, there is a big difference between the majority of the Muslim population in Belgium and elsewhere that just want to live in peace, that want to live as Muslims, and as Muslims from their country, within their country, respecting the rule of law of their countries. I mean, that's the vast majority. And then you have extremist forces, which are Islamists. In Belgium, you have reports on the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood for many years. People were just disregarding it. In some other countries as well. But like in France today, they have decided to act upon it. I hope that now, and my party is obviously asking for, reports and action on the consequences of those influences. I think that maybe there is today some people who do realize that there are some forces that need to be countered, analyzed, identified, analyzed, and countered. Yes, you have influences in mosques with some imams having discourses on women, on Jews, on mécréants.
The non-believers.
On the non-believers. I think today there is, people do realize that there is a problem, that there is an issue, and will ask for some data to be able to identify and then act upon, all the problems that come with it. So it's...
Sorry, go on.
No, it's international influence, as you said, because we have imams that are being named, called by Morocco, Turkey. There was before from Saudi Arabia. You have influence of networks like Al Jazeera coming from Qatar that today enter the homes of thousands of people, and
if not millions.
If not millions, I mean thousands in Belgium, but their influence, I have some Muslim friends who listen to Al Jazeera and Al Jazeera in Arabic, and they say that if you listen to those programs, at the end of the day, you want to get out of your house and kill Jews, because it's really it stirs hatred. And so I think we need to really take that into consideration when we try to set up a way to live together. Because if you want to live together, you need to be able to acknowledge the problems, remedy the problems, and then you can start and try to have this dialogue coming back again. But as long as you don't acknowledge there is a problem and you don't want to identify it, you can do nothing. So I'm confident that now there is this demand, request to be able to identify the problem in Belgium as well. And hopefully if we can do that and walk that walk, then we'll be able to maybe set it right. Yeah.
I envy your optimism. And again, this is not to sound extremely negative there, but if I take platforms and social media, that's where part of my skepticism comes from, because financing and pushing content literally to the eyeballs of millions and way beyond Belgium, in Europe and US and elsewhere. You look at TikTok and you look at how the algorithm is being manipulated, and sometimes manipulated by the content creators themselves and sometimes the platforms themselves, whoever owns the platform. And that really fragments society. So when you say recognizing a problem, it's very hard even to recognize the problem, because many people don't necessarily share the same reality, because what they see with their eyes, it's in straight conflict with what they see on their screens, and they would rather believe the screens than their eyes. And, and that's a very difficult conflict there.
So as a politician, I want to remain optimist, and that was my expression of that.
I appreciate that.
I need that because otherwise, you abandon the fight. And I don't want to do that, because I feel responsible for the next generations, and I think we cannot abandon the fight. But I agree with you. I think social media today is probably a battleground that it will be difficult to win, because of people are anonymous behind their screens. and they just pour their hatred and they share it and they retweet it and they just share on TikTok. I'm not on TikTok, but I know that it's even worse on TikTok than it is on Twitter, which is already bad. It's the continuation. It's a continuum. It's like violence against women on social media. It's a continuum of what's in real life. It's not out of space. It's there, next to, with. It's there's a link between what's happening in real life and what's happening on social media and on the internet. So I think you cannot abandon either of them. It's important to be able to speak out, try to speak out, because...
Let me pick up on that point, because I do hope that social media is a little worse than real life. Therefore, let me phrase it the other way. I do hope that real life is better than social media makes us or make us believe. So I'm wondering, when you interact with your voters, with those who you represent ultimately, how are those interactions compared to some that you get online? And again, your voters are supporting you, so that's a different crowd.
Yeah, so the supporters are supporting in real life and on social media. Some of them are afraid, I think, to express themselves on social media because of what's happening, you know, the wave that comes back.
The backlash,
yeah. The backlash. In real life, if you go to meetings to share with your supporters, then it's nice. I mean, that's nice. Even if people are not always on the same page, but when they come to, you know, hear what you have to say, express their feelings, their anxiety, their projects, their ideas. You can pick up on them, or you can say, no, that's not for me, but then you have a positive exchange. On social media, sometimes you have people who will support you, say, oh, that's a great idea, you know, what you did there, and I support you on that. But mainly, it's all the people who just stir hate that will come back to you and attack you, or, you know, undermine what you're saying and even insult you. But I agree with you that social media is worse than real life, but it's not totally separated from real life, you know?
Yeah, it's not just over the part.
No, there is a continuum, and then you pick up from physical, real life, let's say, to social media, and there it gets worse, but it's not disconnected from. No.
And I think there's also what the psychologists would call the disinhibition effect.
Yes.
So you are there at the keyboard, even if you're not anonymous, but just simply physically you're far away from the subject of your criticism / aggression. So you allow yourself to be more into it, and there are less control. So you're not, that filter is not so much there anymore. So you just write n'importe quoi.
Yes, absolutely. And also you know that probably in the vast majority of the cases, even if you cross the red lines, you won't be sanctioned. And this feeling of impunity that you have behind your screen is such that people don't even, you know, put any they're just let go. I mean, they open
vomiting
the
flow.
vomiting everything.
Their insults. Yeah. Yes, I think that's you're raising a very important point, because that sanction can be even a social sanction of sorts. Where is it your reputation? And again, we're not talking necessarily someone of your visibility who's a politician and a very visible person, but even my personal reputation in my peer group or among friends. And if I say something to that effect, or in a style and in a way that is like totally unacceptable, in a social, physical environment, I probably would get very strange looks, and that would be the consequence. Whereas online, it does not necessarily happen.
No, it doesn't. No. It's a space that we created where people just can, you know, have this impression of power over others, impression of being able to just open the door to anything they think of and let go of any feeling from total hatred with death threats to positive. I mean, there is also some positive, but I think the positive is being overwhelmed by the negative forces, mostly for most public persons. And even I know that even some friends of mine who are not involved in, politics or media or just be there, they were there in the beginning, socially. Facebook was a social place. It has become less and less that for many people, and certainly from my generation, but even the younger one. I can see that many people left social media because the fun of it, where you could share pictures and did not think twice about what you were sharing because you were amongst friends and you had people who were bienveillant. They were really open to respect and careful, and they were not there to shoot you at the first opportunity they have.
Not careful, but caring.
Caring. So today it's not there anymore, and I can really see that people left because of that. Yeah. And so those who stay are not the most
kind.
Yeah.
Individuals, yeah. And all these years that you've spent in public life, so how has that changed your view of humans? Because I'm sure you have lots of positive, negative stories on political wins, but just as much drama. How has that shaped your views?
It's a good question. So. I've been 20 years in the opposition in the Brussels Parliament. So that's...
that changes reinforces your character.
The capacity of fighting, that because you have to. And you work a lot, but there's very little that comes to be successful in what you propose, in what you work on. And so that has been a school of life, as we say, but it was an interesting experience looking back. In the Senate now, my party is in the majority, so it's very different. And also as deputy to the mayor, I was there. I'm a member of the council in my municipality in Ixelles, and for 6 years I was deputy to the mayor. And there I could bring projects on the table and really make a difference on the life of the citizens of my municipality through the different competences that I had, responsibilities that I had. And so those exchanges were very powerful and very, I was really grateful to be able to live that experience, because I think when you try to contribute to shape this world, to make it a better place for your children, for all the children, and you get an opportunity to put projects into action and to really contribute to the life of the citizens in your municipality, I was very lucky to be able to do that. And I take that away as something really very special and important. In the rest of my political life, as I said, I was in the opposition, but I think I probably made a difference by bringing the subjects to the table that others weren't bringing, and in the way that I was bringing them.
Tell me more about that, because I think it's often undervalued, not just the what, but the how. So why do you think that the way you brought a subject in made a difference?
So what I tried to do, and in the beginning it was really possible, the first 10 years it was really, I tried to work cross-party, and especially on women's rights issues, I was really trying to work cross-party and bring the proposals, even write them. And then even if my name wasn't the first name on the proposal, but if the majority, the parties of the majority would take them in and then, pass it through, then I would feel it's a win. It's, because the ideas were there and they were voted. So that was important, more than the fact that if I was the first signature on the paper or not. Also, the fight against anti-Semitism, I think I brought it in the political assembly of the Brussels Parliament. And I was, drafting resolutions on memory of World War II, on fight against anti-Semitism, and I didn't let go. I kept pushing for it, while I was probably at some points the only one pushing for it. And I think that sometimes, even if you don't get the text voted, you get people to think about it, and then maybe it opens the way, and then the next time I get the text voted. At the end, the last 5 years were very difficult, and I could not get anything passed. It was like,
Last 5 years compared to now, or
the
back
last
then
5 years in Parliament.
In
so
Parliament,
from
okay.
2019 to 2024, it was more who I am than what I brought on the table. That was a problem. And so it was very difficult to get anything passed. But
Because of your background, or
because of who I
you
am,
are?
my identity was an issue. Yeah.
And you were called out for that, to say. So basically, that was to discredit you.
Yeah, I think, when you're attacked on your ideas, it's one thing. When you're attacked on your identity and who you are, it's another thing. And it's much more difficult to fight that fight. It was for me. It was for me.
I think it's for everyone. And without knowing more details as to who was behind those attacks, it's for any other person of color or religion or ethnicity or any other, attacking someone based on their identity is an absolute no-no. And I'm sensing here, and perhaps you are also explicit about that your Jewish background is kind of, it's okay to attack someone because of that, and discredit you of saying you're saying that because of that background. And that is completely unacceptable, would be completely unacceptable for any other religious, ethnic, or other background.
Oh, yeah. I don't think they would have behaved against any other person from different background, color, or whatever, the way they treated me. No. They didn't, actually. They didn't.
So what do you do with that?
I decided to leave the Brussels Parliament. I thought if I'd continue, I would be sick. I couldn't. I know, it was not possible for me to continue.
I find it very sad and disappointing to hear, and that you personally, like it personally, individually affected you so much, and that's a very sad thing.
Yes.
And again, more than sad, it's politically catastrophic, because just like with everything else when it comes to anti-Semitism, it's a symptom, and that's what so many people do not understand. We had here another person talking about it in depth. We probably will release that episode perhaps around the one we released this one. But to say that it's a symptom of often much larger problems, and the onset of intolerance. So it's a societal indicator.
So two things. First, I think it's a society problem, and as I said before, I don't think Jews should be the ones fighting anti-Semitism. It's a problem of society. And I think in Brussels, polarization is so bad, fragmentation is so bad today, that they feel that they can cross all the lines. And that even in a political assembly, they can cross red lines, and without any problem, actually, you know. And I was really being pushed in the corner of who I am, my identity, my belonging to the Jewish community as such. And yes, that's very bad. And as you say, I think that the symptom they don't realize, and not only those who attacked me, and they came from extreme left and left. I mean, no, I don't need to hide that. They were attacking me, but around me, at some points, not always, but sometimes, and I recall those times very precisely, the silence around that and nobody reacting to it was also very painful. And not the last 5 years. I really had some group leader of my party, two of them. First, we had one, Alexia Bertrand, and then David Lester. They were really there to defend and to speak out and to, you know, name and shame when they did. But that was really at the end. And it's a symptom. And, you know, when you say that, it's because Jews are like the canary in the mine. And they attack us, they attack Jews, but then they attack democracy, they attack others. It's never just the Jews, it's always first the Jews. And so, yes, I think that they have a bigger problem than just me. But it was, for me, not possible to continue, no.
It's very... Again, I'm trying to find some other words besides sad. It's tragic. Because of, especially for you personally, because you're someone who is thoughtful and really tries to be nuanced in the way you see things and principled. And then it's tragic because of its larger repercussions, to say, okay, how is that going to impact the way they see, again, maybe discrimination, but even other ways of organizing society in education and in culture and in all sorts of other fields.
Yeah, there is. I mean, the problem is there already. Not everywhere and not with the same intensity, but yeah, the problem is there. That's for sure. And yeah. You know, and as I talk to you, I'm thinking back, but it's been an evolution, and it mirrors the evolution in the Brussels region, where today it's difficult for Jews to go in some neighborhoods as Jews, affirming their identity, where you're being called names, you know, genocidal and stuff like that. Even when, like me, you've always fought for respect between people, fought for a two-state solution. I've been active with Palestinian and Israeli women. I've always been, you know, in favor of peace, and that doesn't matter. Actually, none of that matters. You've been designated as a target, and whatever you say cannot change anything. You're the person that doesn't fit what they want and how they want to hear it and what they want to hear. You're not expressing all that, so you're
out. So
you're
unless you're completely do a 180 and,
Oh, yeah,
and
if
endorse
you're-
those
yes.
narratives, if you this
Yes.
self-denial or self-hating,
Self-hatred.
self-hatred,
Then that's
then you're okay.
Then you're a good person, yeah.
Then you're a good person. Only then.
Yes.
And actually then you're a great person because you've betrayed your principles.
Oh, yeah. You turn
which
your
is
back
not,
on who you are.
Yeah.
If you turn your back on who you are, then there's no problem. But if you want to be who you are, honestly, with nuance, with empathy, in solidarity, in whatever, it doesn't matter. Actually, all that doesn't matter.
And this is even more frustrating because, and again, moving away from the local or national politics, it's again, every person is complex. You're not necessarily in that box or that box. You could have a number of views and a number of values and a number of positions, which again might seem contradictory if you really want to simplify things to the degree of A, B, C, or D, or just A or B, black or white. But the world doesn't work that way. So you can be a center right or a little bit right of center political party member, and at the same time hold views which otherwise you might put very different or at a different point in the spectrum. Of course, of course. Why would you need to be cut down to those narrow categories?
No, I consider myself as a liberal, progressive, feminist, secular, Jewish woman. So I don't fit in any box. I'm in a party that's center right. I'm more center than right, but I'm in line with my party on many issues, maybe not on all, especially on women's rights, but on other issues I am. I am a Jew, secular Jew, open to the world, you know. I respect all the faiths. I don't respect religions. I respect those who want to express their faith in their religion, which is very different.
You look at the individual, the human.
Yes, I think you can criticize all religions in every way you want to criticize religions, but you need to be respectful for people who have expressed their faith. That's very different. I will never criticize someone because he believes, but I can criticize the religion he believes in. May it be...
Can you criticize ideas?
You can criticize ideas, yes. And the books are not sacred for me. They're sacred for them. So, you know, and that's also very difficult to get across. But I'm not alone there. But I've actually, being in politics is often feeling alone. As a Jew today, you feel abandoned. As a politician, you're very often alone. So it's been a difficult walk, actually. It's
Sounds like it.
But I'm very grateful I had the opportunity to do it. I'm grateful to my party. I've been loyal to my party. I still am. I'm grateful to my president. I think he's very courageous because it's difficult today to defend the ideas that we defend in the Liberal Party I'm in. And I'm loyal to what I think is right, which means respect of democratic values and fight to maintain them and to have society continue to be able to accept everyone regarding of who they are. And yes, I'm happy I did what I did. Really, it's I'm proud of what I did. I think, and no, I'm sure I'm proud, and I'm grateful because I you know, when I decided to become a journalist, my motivation was I want to try and help to change the world to make it a better place by writing. And I got that opportunity through being a member of parliament, which is even easier, probably. Well, not easier, I'm going to know. But it gives you different leverages to do it. And so
Different tools.
Different tools, yeah. So, yeah, I'm still confident in the capacity of human being to be able to protect our democracies, but I think we live a very big period of turbulence. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's where people like you and your courage and the courage fueled by your values and for your inner strength is just so desperately needed. So thank you for your convictions and for all the efforts you put into it, even if it's so difficult sometimes, but you still keep going.
Thank you.
Thank you. So as a closing point, I mentioned that we have these cards, so please pick one. And if you could read it out and tell me.
In what ways has life treated you unfairly? I don't think life treated me unfairly. Even political life has been difficult, but it didn't treat me unfairly. No.
Tikkun olam.
Tikkun olam, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.